Everyone. All right, so we'll pick up our study in Isaiah, and our study picks up in chapter 40. We'll race through about 8 chapters this morning, so we'll have our fun there. So it's kind of interesting, as we're done with our little historical interlude, where he's actually talking about events that are occurring right now in his time. We're going to start talking again where he's going to talk to the people, and he's going to go talking about the future a little bit again. Interestingly enough, it's the first part of chapter 40 here. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. It's kind of interesting how he offers comfort to them. After all of these things, he offers comfort to them. Which the reason I think it's interesting is, coincidentally, what was Bill talking about Wednesday night, but, the hellfire and damnation preachers that are out there that, hey, you got to have those out there sometimes, because sometimes you got to grab them and pull them out of the fire. But here God is comforting. He gives the example that sometimes you're going to comfort people. And so he sends his prophet to comfort them, to let them know. Now, why the comfort? Why would he need the comfort in all of this? Isn't he mad at them? They're not obeying. They're not listening to them. But, he goes to them and says, I'll give you comfort. I'll help you out here. Things can be better. Things can be fixed. And he talks about this because, well, in his own words, because I'm just that great. And he has every right to say those words. We joke about it sometimes. I'll be at work and somebody will talk about, hey, you took care of that? Yeah, I took care of that. I'm just that good. And it's a joke. We laugh about it, and everybody understands that, yeah, we're just playing around having some fun. When God looks at his people and says, yeah, I'm just that good, he means it. It's not a joke. He's the only one who can look at it and say those words, because I'm that good. Okay, let's talk about the comfort. Let's talk about how things are, really. And so he offers them comfort. He talks about how, interestingly, in verses 15 through 17, he talks about how, the nations that are in the earth, none of them are before him, are nothing. They're powerless. And this is interesting when you put it in context with what we've been studying so far, because what we were talking about so far was how he, or not really so how he, but how he's telling them about all the things that are coming. Powerful nation comes up and takes over so much. Another powerful nation takes down that powerful nation. And all these things, they rise up, and each nation that rises up is more powerful than the one before, controls more territory than the nation it just took over. And rightfully so, he talks about them that, if you're trusting in yourselves, you should be afraid of these nations. But he says, and through the comfort he offers, they're nothing. So these world powers, again, you think back to the 80s, a little bit into the early 90s, maybe late 70s, the two great superpower nations, the Soviet Union and the U.S., everybody wanted to be on somebody's side, and you wanted to make sure you picked the winning side, even though whatever happened between them, nobody was going to win. And there were people who were terrified of this. People who were terrified of how great and powerful this nation had become, how great and powerful this nation had become. Between the two nations, if I recall correctly, we had enough firepower in our nuclear arsenals to destroy the planet a couple times over. Just erase life off of the planet. And yet God says the nations are nothing. Compared to him, they have no power. But he's already done it once and preserved the planet for the people he left behind. And he'll do it again someday, but it's interesting that he does this. I really I'm going to read in chapter 40 and verse 18. I love how he talks about this, because it's not just the nations, but it's the gods the nations come up with. It's in verse 18 he says, to whom then will you liken God? Or what likeness compare with him? Okay, you go find Buchanan, you're going to find a bull. You go find Moloch, you're going to find either an owl or an ox. You're going to Ashdod, I think, was a fish, like the weird reverse mermaid that we all have from fantasy games and stuff. The fish and all this good stuff. To whom will you liken God? When you make an image of God, what are you going to make him look like? He says here, an idol, a craftsman cast. I like this, the exclamation point. It's not just like he's just kind of talking, and then he goes, an idol. Take idols, for instance. A craftsman casts it, a goldsmith overlays it with gold, and casts for it silver chains. He who is too impoverished for an offering chooses wood that will not rot, and seeks out a skillful craftsman to set up an idol that will not move. People, this is kind of interesting here. He talks about that people are setting up these idols, these gods, according to what they can afford. A rich man gets himself a golden idol. A poor man gets himself a wooden one. You kind of see this difference here? Maybe the subtlety of it is they make their gods to whatever their ability is. We drive the cars that we're able to afford. They would make their gods as to what they could afford. So you would walk into a rich person's house, and there might be a large golden statue, silver chains around it, all bedazzled out or whatever they did to them, and it looks great. And then you walk into my house over here, and I've got a wooden post with a face carved into it, because that's my ability to create, and that's my ability to afford. Whereas my neighbor can afford a better God. And so God, he kind of puts this in here, says, they make their gods as to their ability. Whereas the difference is our God makes us to his ability, and he can't be made himself. And so who would you liken God to? There's nothing that can. The powerful nations are nothing to God. What are the things that those powerful nations can make? What are the things that the weak nations can make? They're nothing. God's in charge of it all. He is too great. He says in 21 through 26, he just expounds on this idea that he is too great. You cannot make something that is good enough to say this is what God is like. And no other God on the planet is like that. I think it is, every religion on the planet that has decided to try to make a likeness of their God they're false gods. You've got the Buddha, you've got all kinds, I'm trying to think of all the Hindu stuff. You've got all the pagan things. You just kind of go down the list. About the only ones who refuse to try to make an image is kind of strange. It's weird because it's the same God, just worshipped improperly, and that's Islam. They refuse to try to image God, and they still try to worship Yahweh. They call him by Allah, but it's still that they still haven't tried to make an image of him, even though we do sometimes. Sistine Chapel, beautiful work of art, but somebody tried to liken God, and what do they make him look like? A wise old white-haired man. You can't make an image of him. There's nothing that actually does him justice. And I literally like how he gets into chapter 41, and he starts setting out this challenge to them, to all the nations around them, to Israel, and to those who would actually stand against him by serving idols. And I really like in, let's see here, 41 in verse 4. Chapter 41 in verse 4. We're going to find some familiar language to us, at least in hindsight it's familiar. He says, who has performed and done this, calling the generations from the beginning? I, the Lord, the first, and with the last, I am he. One, he continues to use this phrase, I am. Unlike other gods who cannot say I am, they can simply say somebody thinks I am. God is. He says this to Moses. To talk to Pharaoh with. Who's going to say sent me? He says, say that I am sent me, which was a direct insult to any other God, because no other God can say I am. He can say I am, I exist. My name is, I'm here. They're not. He says here, interestingly, he goes, I, the Lord, the first and with the last. Anybody know what that sounds kind of familiar with? That phrase is going to be used much later on. The Alpha, the Omega, the first and the last. This kind of get this idea that there's nothing new under the sun. Even the way he describes himself, he's done it before, and he's consistent. He was there first, he's there last, he's consistent in the middle, and, the fact is, he just is. No other God can say that. Other gods that people have come up with had a beginning in somebody's mind, and they had an end when everybody stopped following them. Or at least will have an end when everybody realizes they're not there to save them at all. And so this challenge he lays out to them, just read this and go through. I like how he says in verse 5 that the coastlands have seen and are afraid The ends of the earth tremble. They have drawn near and come. Everyone helps his neighbor and says to his brother, be strong. And so as God sets his challenge out, the coastlands, they've seen what's happening. The ends of the earth tremble. So the edges of everything, just creation trembles before him. And the neighbor says, be strong. You know, they look to each other, and the craftsman strengthens the goldsmith. And I'm sorry, what? There's problems in the world, and where are they going running? To the guy who can make their idol for them. To the guy who can create their God for them. The craftsman strengthens the goldsmith. He who smooths with a hammer, him who strikes the anvil. Saying of the soldering, it is good, and they strengthen it with nails so that it cannot be... I'm sorry, if your God has to be nailed to the floor to not move, it's not much of a God. And that's what he's saying here. Anybody want to know that God has a sense of humor? He's making fun of their gods. He's making fun of their God. So he says, I've got this God, and he won't move because I nailed him to the floor. My God doesn't have to be nailed to a floor to move, or to stay still. My God gets nailed to a cross to move me. It's just wild here how I just love it. This is one of the things I love about going back through prophecy. Sometimes you just really see that, yeah, God does have a sense of humor. He's making fun of their gods. You made it. You don't want it to move. You got to nail it down. I don't have to be nailed down, and I will never move. I will always be who I am, doing the things that are to be done. The challenge is great. I love it here. He also gives this idea in verses 14 through 20, how he talks about them. Don't be afraid of things. Don't be afraid of what's going on. I'm not going to forsake you. I will hold you up. I will hold you up. Love that. It's just such comfort he's throwing out there. The reason he comforts them, he tells them, you can be comforted in what I'm going to do for you because I am just that great, and he can mean it. And then he talks about, because their gods are not, the gods that you've started serving are not, come back to me, I can give this to you. And then he goes on to further degrade their gods, to take that down. God?
I like when you're reading through, you get into verses 22 and 23, after he's kind of created those challenges out there, and he says, tell us what is to come hereafter, that they may know that you are gods. Do good or do harm, so that we may be dismayed or terrified. I mean, he's just... We have such a way in this world of trying to take things that are holy and bring them down to our level, to the earthly level. We do that with worship, we do that with just about everything. And they were doing that here as you were talking. They were trying to take things and bring them down to something at their level. And there are things that we just don't know and don't understand because we're human. We're not God. And we have to accept that. And he talks about being able to comfort them and to do the things. He's talked about the things that have happened in the past and the things that are going to happen. And he puts all this out there saying they can't do any of this, but if they can, bring it on, whether it's good or bad. Let's hear it. Let's know what's going. Because he obviously knows that there's nothing out there.
Yep.
But that's the one thing about this. I mean, I almost hear him just saying, why do you keep on trying to make me in your world? Why do you keep on trying to bring me down to that level down there? I'm not there. I control it all. And it's the one thing that's always been hard to, in my life, that's been a big part. Trying to accept there's just a bunch that I just don't know and I don't quite understand. I'm not at this level.
This is kind of, I love this, and I've got some notes on this, because this whole section talks about those who serve idols, and you mentioned it there. Bring them forward. He gives this challenge in verse 21. Set forth your case, says the Lord. Bring your proofs, says the King of Jacob. Let them bring them and tell us what is to happen. You kind of get this sense of the top of Mount Carmel that time, which is, all right, bring your God on, let's see what he can do. There's something even, and you're right, tell what's going to happen. Tell the future. Tell me what's to come. But he does something even more insulting to them. Neville's nodding. What's he do to him that's so insulting? Oh, it's great. What does he say? Tell us the former things. Your gods can't even tell me what's already happened. I love that. He doesn't stop. It's not as if your God can't do anything for you. Your gods can't tell you the future. Your gods can't tell you what you had for breakfast yesterday. They can't tell you the past. And here's God saying, I directed the past. That's my movie. And you can't tell me what the story was. Because God here is talking about, remember we've been going through, he's been talking about not what's happening here in Jerusalem. He's talking about what's happening down in Egypt way over here, in the future and in the past. He's talking about what's going on way up here in Assyria, what's going on down here in Babylon, what's going on up here in this northern regions and the Caucasus regions where all this is. He's talking about what's happening all over the world in the present and the future, and their gods can't tell them what happened to Jerusalem yesterday. He doesn't stop with just saying they can't do anything for you. He says they haven't done anything for you, and they can't tell you what you had for breakfast yesterday. They're nothing. I love that challenge. Again, he's just insulting them. They are nothing. Just tell us what happened yesterday. Can't do that. Maybe they're on a journey. Maybe they're sleeping. Maybe they just weren't here for that part of it. As the challenge on Mount Carmel happens. No, they just aren't here at all. Tom?
It's a question. What is it about human nature that lets us be so foolish that we would reject such an obvious God for such a pitiful God? We do it time and time again.
Yeah.
Even today, we do it for the sake of science or evolution or whatever. I don't understand humans.
I don't understand me either. Yeah, I think Paul probably nailed it a little bit when he talks about the Athenians who would just hear something new. I just want to hear, what's the next great idea? Give me something new to think about. I wonder if we become complacent and bored, no matter how great something is sometimes. And I don't understand why, but we do, don't we? I promise you, I really do. I would love to find a Ferrari 540 for a price I could afford. Okay, I want one of those cars. And I promise you that within 2 years, I'm going to want to move up into a newer one. I'm going to get bored with it. We do that, don't we? Would we buy another car in 5-6 years if the car we had still ran perfectly as well as it did the day we bought it? Of course we do. It's what keeps the auto industry in check, or in checks. It's what keeps them in cash. It's what keeps them producing. I can tell you with the work that I do these days that Ford produces an enormous amount of cars every month because we keep buying new stuff, because we got bored with the old stuff. There's nothing wrong with what we had in a lot of cases. Sometimes, yeah, okay, it catches fire, you got to buy a new one. But in most cases, there's nothing wrong with what we have. We're just bored with it, so we go for something new. Look for some new feature. Look for some new experience. And unfortunately, I think we do the same thing with God. At some point, we don't keep ourselves in check. We get bored because we get complacent. Things are going well. We stop depending on Him. We look for the next thing that'll make things be a little better, because God doesn't promise to make us rich. I don't care what somebody else is saying from a pulpit this morning. He never promised to make us rich. But there's somebody out there telling us they can make us rich. So we kind of go towards that area because we're bored with making what we make now. We want to have more, right? So we look for something. And we have to, I think, look at what Paul talks about when he says, I know how to abound, I know how to be abased. It's just a matter of contentment, and that's tough, because honestly, my car runs really well right now, and I want a new one. I'm resisting it, Candy, I really am, but I want a new one. I've had that car for 8 years. I'm bored with it. You have to be careful we don't get that way about God. It still treats me well. Every once in a while, I got to put a little cash into it to fix something, but for the most part, it'll still outrun most of what's on 275 these days. I don't know why I'm bored with it, but I am. We have to be careful we're not that way with God. Neville?
I think we try to humanize God. We try to make Him something we can understand. And the truth is we can't understand God. So when we see Him going in and killing off thousands of Israelites in the wilderness, we get upset. We can't understand His mind. We're We don't know how he works. We can't see everything as he can see everything.
Yeah, I think that makes it a little more difficult, back to Tom's point, a little more difficult for us. And to what Kyle was saying, we try to make him like us. And honestly, the reverse should be true. We are to be more like him, and we tend to make him more like us. You know, Will?
I like verse 24 where he says, "Behold, you are nothing, and your work is less than nothing."
We're getting in negative integers now. We're gonna have a problem with theoretical mathematics. He talks about them, the work they have, and he's talking about their idols there. Their idols are nothing. Those who worship you, you've become nothing, and the works you do, well, because you're not there, the works you do aren't there either. He's way ahead of some of these calculus people that pop up later on in history. And he's talking about negative numbers. They're not real. Get into that one. They're nothing. They're less than nothing. And yet people were still chasing after them because somebody promised them that they would offer them something. Don't chase those things. I know it's difficult sometimes, but we have to make sure that we're sticking with God. He hasn't made promises he can't keep. That's the whole point of the prophets, right? He makes promises to show he can keep them. He's creating a track record, and he's got a pretty good one so far. Well, this next section talks about the Lord's care for Israel, and I'm kind of going to skip over that just a little bit because we talk about that a lot, how he works through them, how he takes care of them. He's going to start hinting at his elect one in chapter 42 in the first 9 verses, which he's kind of hinting at what he's going to be talking about through later chapters, which we're pretty sure is the Messiah, way off in the future. Way off in the future as things will be happening, so we're looking forward to seeing how that happens. But I want to call back into the next page that how Israel should not fear. And I love this, that when he talks in chapter 44, verses 1 through 5, what he talks about here is his people. And what does he call his people in verse 1? Depending on translation, it may be phrased differently, but he uses kind of the same word. What word does he use to talk about his people? Chosen. The ESV says, Israel whom I have chosen. There are some that say, my chosen of Israel, just depending on which one you got. He chose them. There's a special relationship, and this is why he offers them comfort. This is why he says, I will take care of you. And I love this callback he has. I am the one true God. In verses 6 through 8, he talks about how I can declare the things that are to come. He's calling back to this earlier conversation he had, this earlier expoundance, I guess maybe the word. But what he's talking about, he calls back to it. In verse 9 through 20, he goes back again in chapter 44. See, I'm bored with this iPad. I need a new one of those too. He talks about here in verses 9 through 20, he talks about the idols that are made by men. They're blind, they're foolish. Again, he goes and talks about how terrible they are. The ironsmith takes a cutting tool and works it over the coals. He fashions it with hammers, works it with his strong arm. He becomes hungry, his strength fails. He drinks no water and is faint. The carpenter stretches on it. We were going to this. He cuts down the cedars. He does it. And the rest of it, he says in verse 17, he gets all this in there. It says, and the rest of it, he makes into a god his idol and falls down to worship it. He prays to it and says, deliver me, for you are my God. They do not know, nor do they discern, for he has shut their eyes so they cannot see, and their hearts so that they cannot understand. I like this says there in verse 19, that no one thinks, no one considers, nor is there knowledge or discernment to say, half of it I burned in the fire, and also I baked bread on its coals. I roasted meat and have eaten, and I shall make the rest of it an abomination. Again, he's insulting what they're doing here. They took a log, they fashioned a god out of it, and they burned the rest of it. Okay, let's be honest. If the log were a god, do you burn the other half of it? Could you just imagine what's he doing? Think, people. They do not know, or they know not, nor do they discern. They cannot see, they can't understand. You're not even thinking about the fact that you're worshiping part of a tree, and you cooked bread over the other half of that tree this morning. They're not even thinking about it. And he wants us to think about these things because he goes on to talk about how he is the only true deliverer. And he even goes so far in chapter 46 to start talking about Babylon, how he's going to judge Babylon. I told you we were going to get through these fast. He's going to judge Babylon. And interestingly enough, he looks at Babylon and he starts talking about, keeps with our theme, the gods of Babylon. There in chapter 46, verse 1, he says, Bel bows down, Nebo stoops. Their idols are on beast and livestock. These things you carry are borne as burdens on weary beasts. They stoop, they bow down together. They cannot save the burden, but themselves go into captivity. Now, this is some interesting thing. We don't have all the time in the world to get into Bel and Nebo worship, but Bel had a brother. Bel's brother was Hake. If I butcher a pronunciation, I'm sorry. But you know why Bel was the god of the area of Babylon? Because his brother defeated him and kicked him out of the north. Their own god has already been defeated by another false god. God wins this fight too. And you look at Nebo. Nebo, eventually, before he was really picked up as a god of the Babylonians, was defeated by Marduk, and eventually became the servant of another god, Marduk. Now we're talking about Babylonian and pagan mythology here, so don't think I really think these things exist. But even in their own mythology, the two big gods they looked up to had been defeated by other false gods. The whole reason they were even in the area of Babylon, as far as pagan gods go, is because they had been defeated by somebody else and sent there by somebody else. And God says they'll stoop. Bel bows down and Nebo stoops. They can't even stand against other false gods. Do you think they'll stand against me? I'm real. And again, he's insulting them. I love it. He sets there this idea that they have to carry their gods. Our God carries us. Yeah, Kyle?
Well, there's so much time spent here. In 44, right before we get into all that, he continues to go forward. I believe verse 6, where he says, I am the first, I am the last, besides me there is no God.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying, you can put whatever you want, but they don't exist. But you keep trying, but I'm telling you, they're just not there. They don't exist.
Yeah.
But try anyways. And he keeps on going for it. I mean, there's this huge span of existence where the challenge is, and you would think that nothing ever happened, nothing ever actually coming up to challenge God would open somebody's eyes. And no,
Yeah.
still not. He still keeps having to move forward.
Yeah. Now I like how the author here uses this phrase, the Lord will humiliate Babylon. The Lord humiliates Babylon. Now the Lord has been using Babylon to judge his people. And it talks about here in verses 4 through 7 of chapter 47, how because they did this in a way he didn't really want them to do it. They didn't show mercy. He needed to be brutal, but because they did what he needed to do, but it's almost as if they took pleasure in the idea of just being so brutal, and they'll get their punishment for that. He's going to humiliate them for it. He's going to tear them down. And in October, this is going to be the fall of 539 BC, Babylon falls to Cyrus. Cyrus, and this is again calling back to earlier, he talks about one rising up from the east, that he raised up one from the east and another that he raised up from the north, just depending on where you sit, depends on where they rise from. And I believe they're talking about Cyrus because Cyrus of Persia comes down and obliterates Babylon. Okay, great. You ever wonder why Iran and Iraq really don't get along? Because there's the remnants of those two nations. Well, nobody over there really gets along anymore, but you get the idea that those two nations, they're the remnants of Persia and of Babylon, and they still don't get along. But here we have that he's going to send Cyrus in to take care of it. Because of the arrogance, we'll kind of step back to Tom's comment and the question there, that we go looking for something else because surely there's something better and we can find it. Their arrogance, he'll take them down for it. He talks about their sorceries, their wickedness, and their knowledge. Hey, if you want to be a smart guy, okay, let's look at this one. If you want the best piece of paper saying you're a smart engineer, you want a master's doctorate engineering degree, you're going to go to MIT, aren't you? That's where you're going to go to MIT. If you wanted to be a smart scientific mind at the time, you go to Babylon, because they had the Chaldeans on their side, right? This family race that was raised up in that area, that they could just point, see that star up there, it will be over here in 17 days. And they knew when this stuff would happen. They tracked it. They were intelligent people. I'm not going to back that off of them at all. But he says, because of your trust in all of this, I'll tear you down. Your sorceries, your wickedness, he calls it their knowledge, the misuse of knowledge is where you really get into it. It's not a any kind of indictment against somebody gaining knowledge, but misusing that knowledge. You can look at the natural world and say, I understand why all of this works. And then you understand that it's because God made it that way. God set those things and designed that. Not, I understand how all of this works. Don't need you, God, thanks. That's unfortunately what we do. We take our knowledge and we try to kick God out of it. And it's only there because God designed it that way. That's the way they're using their knowledge at this point. And so he's going to tear him down for it.
Bel and Nebo, the gods that carried on the Babylonian New Year, were so very heavy. Bel was the sun god, Nebo was the son of the sun god, which was the god of learning. Yep. So that comes into the astrology and the Wissel-Kober idea.
Nebo was known as a scribe.
Yeah.
He stooped over his desk all the time, I guess, maybe one way to put it. The thing to close with I want to think about here is how Israel would be refined for God's glory, the kind of heading he has there in the last part of our study. And he's going to make Israel suffer. There is a lot of Israel that will go off into Babylon. There's a lot of Israel that will stay in captivity under Persia. They're going to be tried. They're going to be put to the fire. That's how you refine things. You put them to the fire. That's how you refine silver. You put it in the fire. That's how you refine gold. You put it in the fire. And the purpose here of all this going on is that God's refining his people. And I love it how he says in chapter 48, verses 20 and through 22, there will come a time when I am done refining you, that you will come out and you will be better than you have ever been. And if you want to look at temptation that way, look at temptation that way. As things go on in life, as things go on in the world that bring problems on us, we're being refined. And when we come out the other side of that, when we stay strong, we stay with God, we come out shinier than we went in. We come out better. We come out stronger. We come out more valuable. And so he's telling that to his people, and he's going to use that later on too, the same example of how things work. And so we can take comfort in knowing that even as we might face something the way they faced it, we'll come out shiny. We'll come out better than we were. Just as he's telling his people, you will come out glorious. They're going into captivity just decrepit and just disgusting with all their sin. They will come out of captivity just shining and smelling of roses. And the same thing happens to us when we go into a temptation. We come out stronger than we went in, as long as we're trusting God and not something else the way these people did. So let's close with a prayer real quick. Our Lord, Father in heaven, thank you so much for today. Thank you for the opportunity to be together and to study your word. Thank you for the encouragement and the edification we have in studying with each other. Dear Lord, we pray that the things we've studied today would be something that we needed, something that can help build us up, and that we might go out and teach it to someone else, and that we might apply it to our own lives. Dear Lord, we're thankful for the opportunity we're about to have to worship you, and we pray that you'd be with us, and that all the things we do would be in accordance with your will, that we might please you. We ask it all in your blessed Son's holy name. Amen.